Music for All is proud to sponsor Bandstand. At Music for All, we're about providing positively life-changing experiences. Join us with your marching band at Bands of America or with your concert ensemble at the Music for All National Festival. Students can audition for our honor ensembles or attend camp at the Music for All Summer Symposium, featuring the Sweetwater Director Academy, an amazing week of professional development for directors led by Dr. Nola Jones. Learn more at musicforall.org.
Romeo Music is the leader in audio, video, music, and lighting technology for educators. With a combined nearly 200 years of experience, Romeo Music's subject matter experts understand the struggles that face teachers in today's music classrooms. With a laser focus on educational technology, Romeo Music provides a turnkey solution, everything from audio cables to on-site training. To learn more, visit www.romeomusic.net.
Hello, and welcome to Bandstand, the official podcast of the Tennessee Bandmasters Association. I'm your host, David Aydelott, and I hope you'll join us on a journey through the past, present, and future of bands in Tennessee. We'll delve into the rich history of Tennessee bands, uncovering the hidden gems and legendary figures who shaped the state's band landscape. We'll survey the present, where you'll meet the movers and shakers of today, gaining insights from their expertise and experiences. And we'll gaze towards the future, exploring the exciting possibilities that await Tennessee's school bands. Okay, everybody, we're here with Jacob Campos. Jacob is one of our Bandstand co-hosts. He's the co-chair of the Tennessee Bandmasters Hall of Fame selection committee, I guess you call it. And Jacob and I worked together for 5 years at Franklin High School. And then I left that school, and Jacob became the head band director and was there for a time and did a great job there. And now he works for the Nashville Symphony. And Jacob, I think you're about to go back to school. Is that right? You're going to go get a master's degree.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to Oklahoma City University to study with Jeff Grogan in orchestral conducting. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited for you. I know you're going to do a great job there. Because Jacob is a Nashville product. You went to McGavock High School and graduated in the 2006, I think. Mm-hmm. And then went to DePaul in Chicago and studied with Larry Combs and Julie DeRoche. Jacob is a clarinet player. So, Jacob, we're going to talk about practice today. So let's hear you give us a little spiel and introduction here.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a Tennessee byproduct. And when I went to DePaul, I thought I already understood how to practice, but then Julie DeRoche in particular rocked my world. If you don't know her, she's a clarinet pedagogue. She's actually in her last year at DePaul. I think she's been there 40 years teaching. Larry Combs was principal of the Chicago Symphony, and all the faculty there were either in the symphony or subs. Wagner Campos was also one of my teachers, no relation. But they were just so amazing about teaching us concepts of practice, whether it was in woodwind pedagogy class or wind repertory class, which was we sat in an ensemble and they rehearsed us like an orchestral wind section. And that was with all like principal players from the symphony. But Julie in particular really wanted us to understand how to practice well, because that's the thing that you do by yourself more. You're not with your teachers as often as you are with yourself. And she really emphasized this because she knew that most of us, to make a living, would be out there teaching other folks how to practice too. And she just said it's one of the most important things you can do is not just play at your music. And the most important thing you can do is understand how to break it down for yourself and explain that to others. It should be explainable. That was what she taught us.
Okay, and so you learned this as a music performance major first, right? You were a performance major, and then you became an ed major. Is that correct?
Yeah, I took on the ed major as a double major at the end of my time there. So I spent 5 years at DePaul so that I could get both degrees.
And so this information is coming from the perspective of faculty members that are creating symphony orchestra players and professional players across the country. So this is really, really refined and high-level information that we're getting on this podcast today. Would you agree with that?
Well, I hope so, and I also think it comes from experience with other teachers like, Jeff, David Hazlett, you, because it is different when you go into an ensemble setting, and, you can talk all day about this, but, like, think about it. I was a college clarinet major. I already had buy-in for how to practice, like to care about this. It's different when you go to your band program and you have every type of kid in front of you and you're trying to create buy-in, which is I know you and I that we talked about that all the time. How do I create buy-in so that the kids who are there, we know kids are in band to be social. They're in band because their parents made them. We're in band hopefully because we've inspired them so much and they want to be there and they want to all be music majors the rest of their life. We know that the reality is we're taking a lot of different people from different backgrounds, abilities, and we're taking them on a journey to become a great musician and a great citizen. And we want them. One of the skills in life is to be detail oriented and understand how to do work on their own, regardless of those whatever they're doing. And I think good practicing on your instrument and as a section or an ensemble uh, that applies. I think
Hmm.
that really can help you the rest of your life. So that is what I've learned after school as well, and I'm always trying to improve on that. I have so much more to learn, but it's fun to talk about because I love to nerd out on it because it's kind of the science of how kids can learn and how our brains work.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, not many of our kids are going to be music majors. I mean, certainly we would love to have lots of them to choose to follow that path, but they're going to be accountants and lawyers and doctors and teachers. And the skills that you've learned through your time in university and as a teacher about how to practice certainly apply to other professions that require a great level of detail. And so we want the students, we want the directors to hear this podcast and the students to hear this podcast and be able to put those things in place so that no matter what they do, music major or not, they're gaining valuable experience and perspective through their band programs. So this is really geared towards getting band directors to help their kids learn how to practice. Is that what you want to go with this? Is that how you want to go with this?
Yeah, if we were giving a presentation at a conference, I think we'd call it empowering practice.
That's good. Okay, we'll take it away.
Well, first, I think it's good to talk about the culture that you have in your band program. Uh, in our time together at Franklin, we talked about having a system, a way of doing things that we kind of branded as the Franklin way. It came kind of out of the Franklin model, which was, those different core beliefs about our program. But then we had like our core ways that we approach music. How do we do accents at Franklin? How do we practice scales? How do we uh, articulate on our instrument? We kind of always call them the Franklin thing.
Yep.
And that was a you thing. You brought that to me, which at first I thought sounded a little, even though I was a band kid, it took me off guard. But then over time, as I watched it, I saw that ownership that it provided the kids. And so building a culture where they enjoy practicing, however you can get there, I think is really important because we don't want to not talk about it and just yell it at them, go practice, and throw out practice cards without really empowering them to think about why it matters and how to feel empowered doing it. Because a lot of times kids are just kind of go playing their instrument and they don't really feel like they're getting much out of it, individually on that individual time. So we want them to feel really good about that.
And I think part of the reason we called it the Franklin way or the Franklin model, sort of outgrowth, the Franklin system, was because if you write it down and if you specify it, then it makes it easier for everyone else to communicate. So if you can teach everybody the system, then they all sort of share the same approach to solving problems as musicians. It's a common language that allows them to, as David Vanderwalker would talk about, be able to grab those chunks out of their brain and apply them, those chunks of information, and apply them to whatever it is they're practicing. So it's about creating that sense of everybody is sort of speaking the same language when it comes to musical achievement. That was the reason behind calling it that and branding it that way.
Yeah, I think there's one great approach. I think you can approach it either way, but one approach is to start just doing the concepts first and then back up and then identify what you've been doing. I think people really like that. Then they start to say, like, oh, I didn't know that had a name or something.
Yeah.
But I also think it's okay on the front end to say we have a system and then to start naming things in the front end. That can be overkill too. It can bog people down. But however you do it, putting a name on systems, and then putting a name on systems and having your students be able to explain it is really important. I think that's a really useful skill. Whatever the technique is, one of my favorite things I ever did while teaching was a few years in a row, the students had to make their own podcast, and it was about explaining their embouchure after we had gone through that, explaining how they would practice a section with their friends. And those little mini podcasts they had to create, some kids, that was daunting when they had to do it. But then some kid really got into it, and it was like, "Ba-dum, welcome to Wesley's podcast. Today we're going to talk about the clarinet embouchure." And they would, sometimes they are going to regurgitate information. Sometimes they'll get creative and use their own metaphors. Those are things that got better as I did it, where I said, suggested, find your own way of explaining what I've taught you. And that's just building in that skill where they're repeating back knowledge, and it's in an interesting way, but you're building a culture where they see it as important.
So one of the things, Jacob, you want to talk about is effective equals efficient.
Yes. So being effective is what will make you efficient. And sometimes we like to expedite the process, hop right into our music, just hit a passage right away. But that process of really taking time to go, what is effective practicing? What is effective rehearsal skills? It may seem like that's more paced, but the return is that bell curve where things improve much more at the end. So it's usually not the other way around. It's hard to be efficient and be effective.
Is that a bit of a Stephen Covey thing? Because Covey talks about in 7 Habits how people can't be efficient. You can't be efficient with people. You can be effective with people. Is this an outgrowth of that language?
It is. I'm totally stealing it for practicing right now, but it really does make sense in practice too. You can't. Sometimes we say like, I'm being efficient right now, and we think that's being effective by hopping in and practicing a really hard part or just playing at it a whole bunch. But technically, or like skipping tempos on the metronome, but technically you're not being as effective because you'll have to keep going back to that more. You're not going to learn it the best way you can. And we'll talk about this before we get into some more specifics, but that building that myelin, if you read the talent code where it talks about how people are successful at what they do, building that myelin in your brain between your neurons is really important. And it can get messy if you're not really approaching things the best way.
And that myelin gets built during struggle. Right. When you're struggling with math or you're struggling with a passage in your clarinet music. Right. That's where the myelin gets built. It's not through achieving it. It's through struggling with something that's difficult.
It also can get built slightly when you're doing something ineffectively, and you're building a habit that's not very useful. If you give yourself instant gratification through, well, I played, because if your kid's going to sit there and play the part and they go, well, I played through my music. Well, the little center of their brain is saying, well, I did do what they asked. I played it. But if that's all they know, if they haven't been told or taught or empowered to have a deeper level of what it means to really approach a passage, that's what they're going to do. And that's the habit they will build. So I guess we are talking about myelin right now, building myelin.
And, we're talking about this and these habits and skills. We haven't even talked about passing out literature yet. So one of the things that we talk so much with the kids at Franklin, I did this at Siegel too, is I'm sure this came from Richard Saucedo or David Vanderwalker or one of those legends, but this phrase, slower is faster, meant so much to us and resonates so much with what we're talking about with practice. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the bell curve proves that if you were to practice a part and you skip different tempos and you just kind of play at it at higher tempos, sure, you may sort of grab a few things here and there, but they're not very lasting. And that approach, if you were to picture a graph in your head, it'll look very zigzaggy going up. And you're not really in full control of your results because your brain just can't grab that much. But if you take your time and you pull back, yes, someone else to the untrained ear will seem like they're getting up to higher speeds or playing their music. They're getting through more of their literature, but you'll look like I'm not doing very much for a long time along this curve. You'll be staying in those lower tempos. But then suddenly what happens is, because you've really built up a lot of habit, through habit, you have really built up a lot of reps without mistakes, you're suddenly going to have an uptick where you can handle faster tempos because you've been willing to break down something so slow that not only do you not have the opportunity for your fingers to stray slightly away from a key and not press the right spatula key down, or to fully cover a hole, or for finger 2 and 3 to not line up, but then you're also slowing it down so that your tongue can approach the reed or that place on the roof of your mouth in the exact right spot. You're approaching it with the right airflow for an accent. You're slowing down the whole process so that your body can do the exact right thing successfully over and over again, and just slowly increasing it. And in the talent code, it talks about building up myelin. I hope I'm pronouncing that word right. I am, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
We're going to say that for now. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we build up myelin, in the talent code, it talked about all the best athletes, artists, technicians in the world. They have just done a process so many times, repeatedly, a specific way that it almost goes into the it's a flow state where your brain can automatically do it. A great a person who's shooting a bow and arrow, there's this split second right before they release the arrow where their body actually freezes and it's able to be almost completely still, and then the arrow will fire exactly the direction that they want it to go. That doesn't happen in people who haven't done it very much, because they haven't trained their body to get as close to that center of, I guess, stillness as other folks have. So it's just the automatic part of your brain can take over. It's why walking is now an automatic thing. But technically, we have to think about it a little bit. We tell ourselves to get up slightly. But, for a baby, it's not. That's why they have to work so hard to learn to walk. We take for granted that we're habit-based creatures, that things that feel automatic. We think about walking like a heartbeat, where we don't really think about what is it called? The autonomic, or I forget what it's called. We don't think about our heartbeats, but walking is not just like our heartbeat. We built up a habit so much. Our brains just know our brain automatically now knows how to tell our legs to start moving or to start speaking. But it took time to get there. And that's what you want. You want to get to the automatic flow through being really slow. And playing an instrument is not just a natural process. It is like learning to walk again. It is learning to do anything. And so you have to approach it kind of the same way, which is harder with older brains, because we think about the process more.
Okay, so let's get into some specifics on techniques for playing technical passages.
Yeah, so we're going to be in the individual level right now. So an individual learning to practice how to practice at home. First, what I will say is you can model this with a section. So you can model this with an entire group of flute players or your entire woodwind section. So you can sit them down for a sectional. Let's pick a passage of 4 measures of really fast notes, whatever it is. And what you're looking for is hopefully a named system where they can understand how you're practicing. So number 1, you can vary the rhythms. I think a lot of teachers know how to do this. Switch it up. That's the difference. Is you're playing a dotted eighth, 16th dotted eighth versus a 16th dotted eighth, and you're swapping it that way. I like to do other groupings that I think are really creative. Sometimes I make the kids in a long passage. I'll say, let's do 2 and 3s. Ba-da, ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da-da. Let's do 3s and 2s. Ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da-da, ba-da. That way you're also creating more musicality, because you're not thinking of 4 16th notes, 4 16th notes, 4 16th notes, and you're crossing over the grouping, so you don't get
Yeah.
because that's a really common trope that's not very musical, and so we don't want to do that. Sometimes I make them go in 5, so 1 2 3 4 5, so they're going past the beginning, they're going to the next beat, but then I make them start on the second 16th note, so they're never repeating a note. Obviously, sometimes I'll do 4 at a time. That's one system. That's just varying the rhythms or the groupings. I like to think about chunks and connectors. So our brains like to think in chunks. So let's
go back to that varying rhythms. So as an individual, that makes sense. But if you were doing it as a teacher, what would you do? Just keeping them together with a section.
I do that with the whole woodwind section at times. I'll say, okay, and I start this on this is why that fundamentals time is so important. I teach these skills first in our basic warm-up patterns. I don't do it within our repertoire yet. So if we have a scale sequence that's usually one more in there, I will do that twos and threes within that because they do have a little bit more, they feel a little bit more secure.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that way they're learning these skills in their fundamentals where they feel slightly more comfortable. It also creates variation with doing your fundamentals every day so your kids don't get as bored. I'm always trying to change it up so that they're getting better at those and doing that. And then you have these techniques. And then when I go into a passage in the music, I get to say, all right, we're going to do this passage, 2 3 2 3s until measure 78. The kids know exactly what I mean. They know exactly what I mean every time. So we always do those in fundamental time. And then I tell them, when you're practicing at home, do the same exact things. You can do these skills. It's how you learn. And obviously do them slow, do them faster. And they like the challenge. Kids like things that tickle and stress out their brain just enough. And I'm going to fully admit there are things that I have done that were too hard. When your student who's already has a lot of facility on their instrument is struggling, that can be a good feeling. But then if your third part players are like, I can't even approach this. I have done that. All you should do, if they feel like hopelessness, that's bad. You also, as a teacher, should stop, laugh at yourself, and say, sorry, I put out a puzzle that was too hard. I didn't want to go I didn't want to go supercomputer that can beat every human at chess real quick, because if you can't do it, you shouldn't be doing it with the kids either. So always try to find that. And it's okay to experiment and let them know that you're finding where they're at. It also will help you know where your kid's at. Because what I found is when I first started doing this, they weren't as great at it. But then over time, they just felt they got more comfortable, not only because they knew the system, and there was 3 years of kids at least who already knew how it worked. That helps the freshmen settle in really quickly too.
Back to that common language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about chunks and connectors?
So our brains think in chunks. David Vanderwalker used to talk about this. Chunking is how we should learn our music. But when we're practicing a passage, let's talk about if we're going to practice in the simplest way, beat 1, 2, 3, and 4. Something really tricky. First, I would go at 60, maybe pick a really slow tempo, go beat 1 and 2. Ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. You can break it down, switch the rhythm. You can use other techniques within this technique. Go slow to fast. Once they can do beats 1 and 2, then I would go to beats 3 and 4. They can do beats 1 and 2, 3 and 4. Now do beats 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Connect those so that they can do it between. Then you're able to go from beat 1 all the way to the beat 1 of the next bar. You can go all the way across. If there's another measure past that or another whole passage, whatever your sizes are, you can take the math and do it however you want. Then you can do the same thing and bridge. Once you learn, measure 2 of that, then you can bridge beat 3 and 4 of measure 1 and 1 and 2 of the next bar. That is really key because then now they can go beat measure 1 and measure 2 all together. It can be really any grouping as long as what you're doing is you're starting, you have a chunk, and you pick the space where create an overlap. You purposely pick an overlap.
And that's easy to do in band too. So you don't have to just go letter A to letter B, letter B to letter C. You can go A to 2 bars after B, right? And then you can start 2 bars before B to 2 bars after C. So there's an automatic overlap even between phrases in an ensemble setting.
Well, and how many times did we, on a Friday, we were like, all right, we're going to run the piece. And then you quickly realized where you haven't practiced a transition. And then the band's going, and then it just completely falls apart. And you're like, I realize now we have rehearsed all these chunks, but in these 2 sections, we never rehearsed going from half of this one section to across the bar. And particularly tricky with a tempo change, which band orchestras are so quick to hop in and rehearse those. But do we always do it when the meter might change at the same tempo? Do we do it when it goes from like a feeling of, even if the meter doesn't change, it goes from a feeling of duple to a feeling of 3, even if the meter doesn't
Right.
change. Sometimes those on the ensemble level get really
Yeah,
tricky.
like that with heart and
Um,
voice thing with Gillingham. There's that one metric modulation towards the end. That was like
yeah, that
calculus
was,
for me. I was like a living GIF for that for about 3 weeks. That math
and
floating in front of my face every day. Yeah.
it was great. I liked watching you sweat.
Thanks.
Uh,
There's a lot of that.
yeah, but that's a chunks and connectors is just another great way to practice. Another one I think lots of folks in Tennessee will relate to, especially in the Nashville area, I call potholes, because
Relatable.
we have a city that doesn't understand how to fix potholes very well. Now, I'm not a city manager by any means. I don't, but I don't like that they just dump asphalt into a pothole and it's like lumpy. And then even if they fill the pothole, you're hitting like a random speed bump with your back left tire, and now you're like getting your wheel bearing screwed up. That's not fun. So I think a lot of times people don't realize when you're talking about practicing these long passages, it can be overwhelming that you're like, "Ah, it's so much to practice." And what you'll find is if you're doing a good job with your scales, if you're doing a good job where they have gotten lots of fundamentals down, they can approach a lot of technical passages without having to break them all down to really, really slow. Sometimes it just is easier. That's okay. But what is keeping you from having clarity in a moment with all of your players on a more technical passage is that there's a little pothole in there. There's a breakdown between just 2 or 3 notes. And so you have and people will gloss over those, but that's the difference between when you hear the Marine Band or a Northwestern Wind Ensemble, you hear them sounding so fantastic, is that they have so much clarity across all of the notes with all
Yes.
the players at the same time. And so it's a pothole you have to fix. And so what you do, what I call potholes, is how you actually should fix them in the city. What they do is they just dump asphalt into a pothole and it gets lumpy. What they should do is cut a large square around the entire pothole and make a clean cut square in the road, and then fill it and flatten it to be exactly the shape of the road so that you don't feel it at all.
Like
It's just
Ron
like a
Swanson.
tile.
Like Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec. He did that. He taught
Yes,
he taught us
this
all
is
how
where I
to.
stole
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. I stole this from that show because I went, that is how we should practice. So basically what it means is you don't have to practice, 3 measures of a technical passage. You can go back and find the 2 spots where they're flubbing and go, okay, we're going to practice just between these 2 notes. You'll often find it's a break for one of the sections, like on the saxophone or clarinet or on flute, where they're having to flip hands or they're flipping between multiple fingers. And then you're just going to go between those 2 notes. You're going to go da 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 da. Then you'll back out and do wherever it is in the beat. You'll back out and do the note before and the note after. You'll back out another note on either side, in the front, approaching those 2 notes, and after. And then you'll slowly piece it together until you have a good enough chunk where they can go. And then once you put all that with the rest, it'll fly by. That is an effective way to get, and it's efficient as well, because they don't really have to learn the whole passage. Because let's be real, if the entire passage is a B flat scale, except for this one little modulation moment where it flips to some weird notes, that might be the spot you need to stop on and fix. You don't have to fix the whole thing. So don't get overwhelmed too when I talk about this system. Um, yeah. And then when I say slower is faster, I really want to take time to say that it should be every day for the individual practicing. So if you have a long technical passage where students practice on their own, they really should start a slow tempo every day to build that myelin. So starting at 60, and then maybe they're only able to get it successfully to about 72.
And you mean beats a minute. When you're saying these numbers, you mean beats per minute on the metronome.
Yes, I mean beats per minute. It's just how I practice private lessons. Julie would also say, like, and her husband, Don DeRoche, who was our band director for a time, would say that, teaching your rehearsals sometimes should feel like a private lesson. But when you're practicing a section on your own, you really should think about practicing it slowly at 60 and then going to 66 and 72, and only do what you can successfully do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, because you've done that, you should be able to get up to 70 to 80 or so. but you started at 60 again. And the next day, maybe you got up to 88, but you started at 60 again. Every day, starting the slow. Yes, every day it will feel like you're in the slow more. And it will feel like you only spent a fraction of your time at the real tempo. But that's just the reality of being a musician. You will spend a very small amount at the real tempos, but you will be so much more successful and able to do them because you spent 80% of your time at slower tempos.
Yes.
And that's true for rehearsals. If you do this with your students more, you will actually be able to then know what tempos are probably more approachable in rehearsal that make everybody feel like they can do all the concepts you're talking about. I know, David, that you talked about this a lot with the students about not chucking out other
Yeah.
skills. Will you talk about
Got to
that
pack the
some?
minivan. Yes. Students are so keen to, when they learn one skill, to throw it away when they encounter something new. And what we always try to talk about at Franklin, and we did this at Siegel too, is you have to maintain those. You're building layers of skills, not just focusing on one at the time. And there's an expectation, a cultural element that goes with that sense of being responsible for all the information at once. That's not always easy and takes sort of daily reminders for students to be able to get into that place.
For sure. And you want your students to feel successful. So if you are doing this a lot with them, you should have a better gauge of what tempos you should be rehearsing your literature with. And then you're able to put them in a place where they can actually still play with a good tone. They can still approach it with a better articulation. They can actually have time to think about intonation. But if you're not doing that, if you're just playing it too fast, if you're going through too much of the music, maybe
Yeah.
too, that's another thing. You're not giving them the opportunity. I mean, I'm a professional clarinetist, but I can't just throw myself into anything and always sound good. I mean, I really do try. My brain it's easier for me now. But if you put me in a place where I feel uh, that it's too difficult, I mean, it gets really tricky. So you just want to always put them in a place where they can actually use all of their skills more automatically. You don't want to have them having to think about too much. Obviously, they're always thinking about a lot, but you want to get them to a place where they can think about their tone, stable embouchure, all of those things successfully because they're going at a tempo for whatever technical passages that they can actually
Yeah. They
achieve.
can only do it if it's slow. Yes. So to recap, we talked about being effective equals efficient. We talked about building a system, a branded system that you can reference with the kids. Techniques for technical passages, varying rhythms in those technical passages, chunks and connectors, potholes, like how to really fix a pothole, not the Nashville style, and then slow to fast, doing it every day. Let's talk a little bit about a specific student that you've sort of mentioned here in our pre-conversations about this, the Allie Minucci method.
Allie Minucci was a fantastic saxophone player at Franklin. She was already just one of those great kiddos who just whatever you do, they go do it. It's amazing what happens, right? When they just listen and they go after the information that you provided. She was in a saxophone quartet that performed at the Chamber Music National Festival with Music for All. They played Mountain Roads by David Mislenka and Nuages by Botza. And oh gosh, they were just such a fantastic group. But Allie in particular was group leader, and she was first chair All State on saxophone, and all of that I think was possible through her own study. She studied with Ken Osmick, an amazing private lesson teacher. Um, but also, I really think she did listen to some of the things that we talked about. One of them was, she was really struggling in Mountain Roads. I'll never forget with these really high parts and way in the upper range of the altissimo of the saxophone and other technical tonguing patterns that really went around those palm keys on the saxophone that gosh are just so tricky at times because your palm just can't move and as fast as your fingers can. So what I asked her to do was I said, take a piece of cardboard or just a larger sheet and copy your music, cut out your intervals that are difficult or small passages and line them up 1 through 10. And then what I want you to do is that becomes your warm up. You've become a really successful student. You've practiced your scales. You know your scales. Use them as your warm up every day because they're so hard, so that you're getting more time on them. But you can do that. So she would take this one spot where it went da dee da 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 like that, but it was a little slower and lyrical. And she would take that and she would practice every note. Ba da 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 dee 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 da 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 da. Ba da 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 dee 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 da 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 da. And then she would do it slurred, and she would go body, body, body. And those of you listening, please don't judge my pitch center. I'm not a singer. That's why I play an instrument. Some people can do both. I cannot. But Allie was so great about that. She just took that advice, and what the method really is that that's when you start using your literature, and you take out chunks of your literature and you use it as part of the warm-up process. Um, she even took out a rhythmic passage and laid it out in front of her, and then she would just play that rhythm every day. And then she laid out the rhythms that the other saxophone parts had, because it was so tricky. He created this syncopated part where the other members came in and out. And so she wanted to feel like she could understand every part. And that was amazing. So I started doing that in rehearsal more too. So when we played Danceries, there was a really tricky movement in there by Kenneth Hesketh, similar to the Allie Minucci method. I made a rhythm key for the entire piece that had like 7 different rhythms on it. And it was, everybody had to learn all the parts. They had to learn all
Love that.
7 and clap and be able to play them on their instrument. They were so it was in 6/8, but it had these weird entrances. And then it was so fun because I would take, line 1, the ones that work together. I'd say line 1 and line 4 and line 7. These groups in the band will play on concert F. You'll play on concert C. And the kids just got good in isolation playing these rhythms. And then what happened was, when we went back to the music, they were prepared to play them. We did this before we ever played the piece. It was like 3 weeks before they ever saw the music. When we played the piece, not only were they ready to see those rhythms, they understood how they were counted. They were also ready to hear other sections play rhythms that they had learned. So they understood how their part could fit in these weird pockets and grooves with that rhythm. This is really good for marches, where people who typically might not have an offbeat can learn it. I think there's tropes where people say French horns are just so great at playing offbeats. Well, if you're a band director that doesn't practice marches very much, that might not be true.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really need to build that skill in by having all the different rhythmic parts. This is great because you can practice articulations on it. You can practice rhythm reading, and you're getting them to learn the piece before you learn the piece. So how about you're at this is the connectors thing, right? Within your own scope of the year. How about you're in the last 3 weeks of preparing for a concert, and you're starting to do the rhythms for the next music you're about to do in class. You're about to start playing in keys that you're about to be in for the next concert. You're about to start playing articulation patterns that are going to be in the next music on the next sequence. Mm-hmm. That is really building, practicing. And then explain this to your kids, what you were doing, so that they don't feel like they're isolated in one concert. They know they're also thinking about how you as a teacher are always preparing for the next thing, how they need to prepare for the next thing. I really believe that we should always be pulling back the veil. There should never be Oz who is secretly bestowing upon you information. The more transparent we are, the more they're a part of the process. That really does empower them to be better. So they should know exactly what you're doing all the time. It doesn't need to be witchcraft.
Yeah, magic. Right.
Yeah, it should be. I think because the magic comes from when the method works and they go,
yes,
I'm getting better, and then the concert happens. That's the magic. There's a lot of potion work and alchemy that happens in the open.
Yep. And I think too many band directors think the magic happens at the beginning. That there's some Dumbledore or Gandalf that's in front of the ensemble that just knows all the magical words to say at the very beginning, like a spell. And it's not that. It's getting the kids to be able to be this detailed and this punctilious on all these little details, and be patient enough to take the time. And then it sounds like magic later on.
Yeah, and I think that can be the magic too. I do think that beginning stage can be more meaningful. I think, right now society is really big on mindfulness. I think that's good. I have to work on it too, to to help me with my neuroses and anxieties in life. But I do think it's easy as a director. I remember myself being there at times, even with all these practice methods, where you're just like, oh, I have to schlep through all this to get to the concert. But I like to remember this quote from Into the Woods that, there's a song about, it's called A Moment in the Woods. A little scandalous, but I think it applies to life. It's if life were only moments, would you ever know you had one? And so I think the moments matter more. Those concerts matter more because we have Average Tuesdays where we do this stuff, where we break things down. And then you used to talk about relish the daily grind, relish the Average Tuesday. So I'm stealing this from you right now and trying to extend it into there's also magic in really enjoying the process, enjoying what it feels like for two notes to just sound so good.
Yes.
When you articulate from a low note to a high note, to feel the two fingers on your instrument, like a woodwind instrument. I'm going to create a whole series about how to practice because I could get layer and layer, and especially into woodwinds, about how to break down how your fingers work. But just enjoying that, just like if you slow cook your eggs in the morning and you really take your time to put a little butter in the pan and let them slowly cook up and not just rush through it, that's a mindfulness moment. And it's calming, and it's also really, it's focused, and it just makes things better in the long run and more sustainable, because then we don't get in the habit as much of, I have to do this to get to this other thing. People always say, that I get to. Well, that phrase doesn't really do much unless you know how to really apply it. The get to feeling comes from starting to try to enjoy the small joys of success in little moments.
Yep. So much of this takes modeling, demonstration. It's you as the teacher modeling, and then it's also the older students modeling to the younger students.
I agree. I think one, if you have a method, your older student should be able to explain this, and this is what they do in those sectional times. I can't tell you how many times that at first, when we started splitting into chamber groups for our music and or actual chamber music, it's nice to take a piece of music, break it down, especially a chorale section, and take the 4 layers and split them off on their own in the hallway and a closet and let them all go work on it and get things in tune. But none of that works really well if the students don't have a grasp of, like, we're going to slow down our metronome, we're going to slowly speed it up. This is our model for how to practice intonation. This is our model. And your older student should be able to explain it. That's the ones that during leadership camps, I see a lot of leadership camps work on, and I'm saying this with a lot of love, it is important. We should always include the stuff about working together, inspiration, being good to each other. But a lot of that time should also be talking about what is our system and our way of working together so that students can, like, talk to each other. So modeling a small sectional, modeling what it's like being a student who just doesn't understand what you're saying or can't do what you're asking. That way, they are making quick decisions that make sense. So if you have 2 leaders running a sectional and one kid's like way behind, they instantly eyeball each other and go, yeah. And then, like, one of them will grab that kid and take them off, and they might need some more help. They don't need the band director to tell them to do that all the time, and they can play along with them in that part. So that's really important. I think the other side of modeling is in class. You, at the beginning of the year, should be doing these methods, and then again pulling back the curtain, telling the kids what you're doing so that they can do that themselves, so that they can go off on their own and actually perform these concepts. And then creating class time where maybe they create a podcast, maybe they make a presentation about how to practice. You actually have a whole class day dedicated to how to practice. Maybe even give them a model section of just their music, of only their music, like assign the clarinets apart, assign the trumpets apart, and say, I want you to make a video explaining how you're going to practice this part and how to break it down. And then just to see if they're understanding the concept so that they can model it for you, and you've modeled it for them. And then lastly, I think older students, everybody should feel comfortable playing in the band room, including the music teacher. The music teacher should sometimes get your instrument out, maybe get out a secondary instrument, tertiary instrument, I don't know, and then practice practice in the rehearsal space, and uh, do it the right way and sound like you're improving,
Which
and
means
go
making
slow to
mistakes
fast,
publicly.
and then going so slow that you can't make a mistake after that you've made a mistake.
Yeah, that's
Backing up,
leadership.
seeing that back up. Yeah, I mean, and also it's good for your heart and soul. I think it's important for band directors to try to keep up their instruments somewhat, as much as you can. Everybody's got a different approach about, how much they play their instrument, but it hones your skills. Getting out of, me getting out a euphonium player. I'm saying as someone who never did this, I never found the time. So I want to establish this. I'm talking about things that I always wanted to keep getting better at and keep working at. I definitely did it for some other instruments. I got out a flute. I kept my woodwind instruments up more. Sometimes I would get out a trumpet, but there's instruments like euphonium and trombone where I wish I had taken more time to sit in the band room and start working on. But I also was really self-conscious about my trombone playing. I'm glad I've never had to, as a band director, be retested on that. Uh, it, it's one thing to talk about it and one thing to do it, but they're your students seeing you in those vulnerable places, it's good for them to see you doing that. And I think that's great modeling too. It creates an environment of leadership while being sitting down and getting on their level for a moment too.
Yeah, and it's that Mike Holbrook was on the podcast a couple of days ago talking about growth mindset. I mean, particularly in rural programs. But when the band director's in the band room practicing, making mistakes, not just ripping out a bunch of high notes and playing super fast, but struggling, that sort of begins to instill that sense of growth mindset where it's okay, where the director's vulnerable, and it makes it okay for the kids to make mistakes. It's okay for the kids to maybe struggle on something and then need another student's support. Gives another student a chance to really be a good member of the ensemble by being helpful and supportive during another student's struggle. So there's so much good that just comes from that, establishing what great band programs are about, especially when they embrace growth mindset.
I'll never forget a great student we had named Rowan. And Rowan, he was awesome. He taught me. I had a moment where I was in percussion class, and the other teacher was at the front, and I was trying to play four mallet. So I kind of jokingly told the class around me, to, give me some grace here, kids. I have the world's tiniest hands for a man. I don't know. They perfectly fit the clarinet. But I'll never forget Rowan was like, well, then have you thought about adjusting here and doing this? It doesn't really. And that was so nice for that moment for a student to think about that, even with their teacher, and treat me no different than another student. I thought that taught me that this is a student who is paying attention, hopefully. And we talked about that after, and how don't wait always for someone to tell you. Not everybody will be as vulnerable as me and laugh about my tiny hands.
I think there's a lot of talk about culture now in programs, and I think there should be. I don't know that you can have culture be in practice without the struggle that comes with the pursuit of excellence. I think the struggle makes the culture important, right? Otherwise, it's like playing tennis without a net. There's no challenge to it, and therefore it takes no grit. In order for there to be grit, in order for the culture of the band to be refined and honed, then there has to be a sense of struggle towards excellence that's a part of the daily routine of that band. You can't have courage without fear. It takes fear to have courage, right? And so I hope that as people are continuing to talk about culture, they will also talk about that pursuit of excellence facet in the culture discussion. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think for me, I would frame that in the sense of what you heard me say earlier. Kids should feel successful. Well, that page we're talking about, the success page, doesn't just mean I'm perfectly achieving things every time, even at a slow tempo. That can be I approach something that is very difficult, a concept I'm struggling to understand, to commit myself even to, being able to be vulnerable about the fact that it is difficult, accepting that it's hard, that the concept hasn't set in yet, and or the ability to achieve it yet, and then persevering anyways, staying with it anyways. That is success. So basically, it's you define what success is for your students. So if success can be you're always talking about a point or a score or a rating, or success can be you're talking about going after difficult things.
Hopefully, it's not talking about scores and ratings.
Yes, that was my
Yeah.
point. Or you're talking about going after difficult things and really pushing yourself. If we want them to build courage, we don't want it to just be that wide open, naked and afraid show, because you're just throwing them things and they don't feel like they have the skills to approach it. You want them to have the natural struggle of, can I do this thing? Oh, wait, when I'm equipped with the skills and I do them, I am able to
Mm,
achieve. That is a great
I love
long
that.
life lesson. So we don't want to just throw them into the void. That struggle puts you into a deep existential crisis on the far end, or just
It puts you
makes
out of
kids
band,
want.
is what happens most
That's what I
of
was
the
about to
time.
say, or makes you want to quit
Yeah.
because they're just being thrown things
Yeah, I
without
like that
help.
word equip. You have to equip them with the skills, not only on how to play lip slurs and things like this, but also how to deal with
Yes,
those challenges. You have to armor them a little bit
yes,
against
they
this
should feel.
against the slings and arrows.
Yes, they should feel like Batman with his utility belt, and that at any given moment, when they're like, "There's new challenge enemy approaching," they can go, wait, I have a utility belt item of a way to do this. And eventually, if you build up enough of those utilities or those items, you can start to mix and match and create your own. Some of these things I've talked about today, I made up. I didn't learn them at DePaul, and I'm sure they're not something that other people aren't doing. I just found my own name for it, and I started doing it myself. And yeah, I wanted to just figure out another way to break it down, or I was presented a problem and I needed to figure out how to solve it and try to be effective so that I could fix it as efficiently as possible too.
Mm. Well, Jacob, this has been great. Lots of really wonderful information that I hope directors will get a lot out of. You have any final thoughts before you travel off to Oklahoma City and try to avoid tornadoes?
I just hope that teachers feel really empowered themselves to talk about practicing and to slow down in your own classroom. There are so many times while I was teaching where I didn't slow down. It's so easy in this space. We're on this podcast right now to feel more paced about everything. But then when you're in the classroom, we know that you're not afforded that time. And I wish there were times I slowed down and stepped back
Yes.
and took more times. My best memories are the times where I slowed down. It's actually the things I can remember, I think, because I was slower. I mentioned that podcast with those kids. I remember that lesson more because I took my time a little bit more with it. And yes, it felt like it was eating into class time a little bit. But then on the end, the kids got way more out of it and they really started to understand concepts more. So I think slowing down yourself and looking at what you're doing and looking for the places in your curriculum where you're just maybe just going through the gauntlet and you're not really stepping back and making sure everybody was absorbing,
Yeah.
including yourself. Are you absorbing what's happening? Are you getting to see that they're feeling equipped? And are you feeling equipped to really approach what you're doing? If you're having to throw too much at it, if you're feeling like you're just zipping through class every day because you've put too much music on your plate or you haven't done enough fundamentals,
Or you're
so
a
you're
young
just
teacher and you want the kids to like you, and so you want to move on to the next thing. And you have to learn how to be very crafty about slowing down, making them do it again, and convincing them of why that's important. Those cultural aspects of your band that are about standards and excellence will allow them then to be okay with slowing down to get it right. And so you don't have to worry about them liking you as much because you've established a culture that allows that to become a thing.
completely. I think some of us have a deep fear in the back of our minds of boring people. We don't want to be a boring teacher. But again, that mindfulness, that slow approach, then the uptick, it'll prove to them that you're not
Yeah.
boring. And, you can laugh and have fun and be crazy and think of metaphors and little side quest conversations in the midst of doing these things.
Yeah.
I think that's things that we got more comfortable with. So
Yep.
I hope this is helpful. And, I'm excited about doing this with some college students and future students when I'm back in the classroom.
Well, we're looking forward to having you back on, Jacob, and we wish you nothing but the best as you go into your next endeavors. And thanks for being on today.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Bandstand. Bandstand's mission is to build a stronger, more unified band community in Tennessee by fostering meaningful conversations about the past, present, and future of school bands in our state. If you have topic suggestions or need to get in touch with us, email us at tbabandstandpodcast@gmail.com. Your input is important to us, and if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss about the past, present, or future of Tennessee bands, please let us know. Again, that email is tbabandstandpodcast@gmail.com. Right now, we're broadcasting on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, so please subscribe, review, and rate. Box 5, please. And if you find something interesting or helpful, please share this podcast with your friends. Bandstand is proud to be sponsored by Music for All and Romeo Music. See you next time.